Hi, this is Regina from Regina's Crafting and More, and welcome back. Today I'm going to show you a little applique St. Patrick's gnome. This is just the template on him. Kind of hard to see really anything about him because he has an applique hat and an applique beard. The rest is all fill stitches. I created him in palette 11, which is the equivalent to PE Design 11. So let's get started and get this little guy stitched out. I sent him to my Solaris 2 via Wi-Fi, so I'm going to touch on the pocket. By the way, I'm in the embroidery function, and I'm going to go to the Wi-Fi, and I'm going to select my little gnome and hit set. And I'm going to go back into the frame size and pick the 5x7 because that's what I'm using. And then I'm going to go to embroidery. Okay, so this little guy has a background stitch of 4-leaf clovers before it ever starts stitching him. So let me turn this camera over here. I've hooped some tearaway stabilizer and my fabric. And do I have my light pink? My, like I said, my first step is the background fill. And I think I'm going to do him in a really light green. And I must have put my lighter green up on my thread right. So let me get it. This is the one I want. Yeah. Okay, so I'm using a light green sorry. Thought I had already gotten this all set up. And then my husband called and wanted me to come watch Blue Bloods this morning after breakfast. And so I got interrupted and didn't get all this set up like I thought I did. All right, so I've hooped my green thread for my for my background fill, and I don't have my foot on here. Let me come right back. Okay, got my embroidery foot on here, and I'm going to start this background, and I like to go to my first position. So I go to the, let me back up. So I go to my little needle button here. I hope you can see this right here. And it takes me to all my thread steps. And I just press 1 to go to the very first position. All right. Well, I get started. Maybe you can see some of it. I'll come back when some more is done. My background stitch has finished. As you can see, it's left a hole cut for my little gnome, St. Patrick's gnome, so that there's no stitching underneath, especially underneath the white beard. I didn't want that stitching showing through. So let me get after it. So now it's going to stitch his pant legs, which I've got in black. And let me get that thread so that it's not going to end up being behind my green shoes. So it's going to do his pant legs, and I'll be back. His pant legs are step number 2. The decorative fill, background fill, is step number 1 that I already stitched. This part right here. Alright, I've stitched the little pant legs, and the next step is a placement stitch, which I think you might be able to see that I've stitched my placement stitch with a dark green to match this fabric for the hat. And now I need to put my fabric down on top of that placement stitch and do the tack down. Alright, so I'm going to trim that. Trim this all the way up next to the thread line, just as close as I possibly can, without cutting the stitching. And then it'll do a open zigzag along that, a small narrow open zigzag, to make sure that all the fabric edges are going to get covered. Okay, so there, I've trimmed that up. Put my hook back on and do my narrow zigzag to make sure it's going to cover all the stitches. I mean all the raw edges of the fabric. And it looks like it's doing a good job covering that up. This, by the way, is my test stitch, so hopefully it'll go well. Alright, so that looks good. It's not going to stitch on the bottom because the band of the hat will be on here. So I'm going to go ahead and let it do the zigzag stitch, the satin stitch, along the edge to hold that down. Oops, hello. Well, I don't know why that didn't cut. Stop that. Down. So it's going to do the satin stitch around the edge of the hat now. So that'll be held down permanently. And I think I'm going to do a little trimming as some of the threads look like they popped up on this fabric. And I don't want those. I'm going to cut that because it's just barely, it's just kind of doing the outline for the satin stitching, so I'm not interrupting the satin stitch itself. But I do want to make sure that I get all these little threads trimmed, that the fabric is fraying off. I don't have any interfacing on it, which would be a good idea if you have some that looks like it's going to fray a lot. So now it's doing the satin stitch. Oh, goodness. And I just matched the fabric on it. Use the thread to match the fabric. Alright, so there's the end result of the hat. It's done the satin stitching around the edge. So the next step is, let me turn this around and let you see this, is it's going to do the mittens and the shoes is what it's going to stitch next. So I'm going to change my thread color to be what I want for those items. This is the thread I'm going to use to stitch out his mittens and his shoes. I'm just about finished with the little mittens, as you can see. Got the mittens on the left-hand side, and it's just about finished on the right-hand side. It'll come down here and stitch his little shoes. This is all in the same step, which is step number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can't remember how many steps we've gone now. But it's going to do his shoes. So it's doing the left shoe, and it'll be finished with this step. And I believe the next step after this is his beard. Alright, so it's just about finished with the left shoe. It's got to do the sole of the shoe. Goes doing the sole. I'm sure you can see the sole of the shoe on the right. So far, so good. So we are on step 7, and I'm going to change the thread because it's time to do his beard. I'm going to put in white. Now, I'm just going to use fabric. If you want to use some furry or beard type fabric, make sure that you put a topper on it so the needle doesn't get stuck in the beard material, and then you can pull that topper off when you're finished with the beard. And it's there we go. Put my white thread on. This is just one of those skewer sticks from the grocery store, and it's going to stitch a placement stitch. And you can't see it very well. I should put in a light pink, and normally I would have done that, because I like to see where I'm going to be putting my fabric. And I'm going to be using this fabric, if you can see the design on it. If you're questioning, well, why are you putting white on top of white? Well, I want this design to be for the beard. Alright, so I'm going to just stick this up, make sure, yep, I've got it to turn the right direction. Okay. And I'm just using scraps that I already had instead of cutting. is doing the tack down stitch for the beard fabric. And then that will have to be trimmed away. I've done the tack down on my beard fabric, and now I have to trim it. And I'm going to, before I do that, I'm going to change my thread to white. I did go back and pull it out so that you could see. I took out the white, and I put the pink in and did the tack down so you could see where it is. Alright, so now it's tacked down my beard fabric, so I need to trim it. So you need to make sure that you keep turning and trimming up as close to the stitching line without cutting it, hopefully. And I'm using these little squeezers from Famore. They're the titanium snips. Sorry, that's my dog. And I would suggest, I know a lot of you are probably like me, I like to starch my fabric, but in this instance, I would say do not starch your fabric. This is, like I said, a scrap from another project that was pretty well starched, and it makes it a little harder to trim through this fabric and be able to manipulate it easily. And I'm just about done. So the next step will go along and do a very open zigzag, just to make sure it's going to cover your fabric that might be left out from the stitching. So let me get this. So I like to do my placement stitches in pink. That way I can see them, especially if I'm on white. Just something that's lighter than your final thread color, just so that you can see where you need to do your placement. And I think I'm going to trim this if I can. Yeah, that should be okay. So this stitch will do a open zigzag. It helps to put the lock down on your embroidery machine.
Kashi, I guess, saw that I didn't spin the other coupon.
Alright, so it's doing its tack down around the fabric of the open zigzag, just to make sure that your fabric that you did cut away from the stitch line is cut short enough. And if it isn't, then you're going to have to do some pretty close. Alright, so hopefully you can see how close that little open zigzag is. Right, so now it's going to do the satin stitching. I've got to find a do not disturb button so that when I'm doing a video and something comes across, it doesn't stop my video. Alright, so hopefully this satin stitch now will do the job. It'll go around and it'll do a line on one side of where the satin stitch is, and then it's going to do another line on the other side. of the satin stitch, just to give it a base for the satin stitches to hang on to, because this is pretty tiny satin stitch that's going around to hold this fabric down, and I just want to make sure that it has something to hang on to really well and keep the satin stitches in place, since this is such a small. Alright, and here I've got a little thread that just popped up, so I'm going to trim that, and I'll be back. Alright, so that satin stitching has finished, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. It didn't do it at the top because I have an applique for the brim of the hat that goes right here, and I didn't want any satin stitching to be bulking it out right there. So that's what it's going to look like. Alright, so my next stitch, I have a 4-leaf clover going in the top part of the hat, because the beard was done in a white thread. I've designed it so that the 4-leaf clover is white on the hat. So I've designed it to have some, let me get that thread from the, I've designed it to put a little bit of underlay underneath this white. So hopefully and like I said, this is my test stitch. Hopefully the green fabric won't show through with the underlay that I put underneath the 4-leaf clover, and it won't be too heavy. So we'll see. Alright, so it stitched my 4-leaf clover, and my thread broke right up there at the top, so I had to rethread it. Alright, the next step is the brim, and it's going to basically stitch this outline for the brim, and I'm not going to worry about it too much, but I'm going to put I'm not going to use any darker thread because I pretty much have outlines. Sorry, I'm changing my thread to be the color of the fabric for the brim of the hat, which will be the darker green. Excuse me. Alright, so I put in my dark green. It's going to match my fabric. And I bet you I'm going to have enough of this other piece, which was also a scrap. Oh yeah, I'll have plenty. Let's see, will it go that way? Yep. I got 2 pieces out, but I'm only going to need to use the scrap from the top of the hat. So it's going to stitch out the brim of the hat, do the placement stitch. Okay, so that's my placement stitch. And like I said, I'm going to use this scrap, and I think if I stick it just like that, I'm going to have enough that I can cut. Oof. Maybe I should stick it like this so I'll have room to cut. Yeah. Okay, so that'll give me some room to cut. And I'm going to do the tack down stitch now. You can put a little tape to hold it if you want. Oh, what the heck was that? Cut that off. I don't think my machine likes that thread. Whoops. You know what? I'm going to cut this and pull that thread out some more. I've had this particular thread for a while, so it may be dried out. I didn't do much stitching for a while because of some health problems, so let me back up and try that again. So this is just a tack down. Not too worried about my thread issue. But I do want to, okay, now I gotta raise that up. There we go. Keep that thread out of the way. Okay, so I'm going to trim that. Alright, so I've trimmed away the excess fabric, and I'm going to stick it back in and rethread. Now, this thread is a little old and it's almost gone, thank goodness. Alright, so this will do the open zigzag around the... It doesn't do the zigzag at the top of the brim because there will be stitching right there, but it'll do the open zigzag around the main body of the brim of the hat, and that was why I didn't do any zigzag at this part of the beard fabric, so that I wouldn't have that bulk I had to contend with doing satin stitches on top of satin stitches. Alright, so that looks good and all my fabric's covered. So the next step is to do the final satin stitch to secure the fabric down. Remember, it'll go around on the top and then it'll go around on the inside to give that satin stitch something to hang on to. This is just how I was taught to do it many, many years ago, and it's worked well for me. So now it's going to stitch out his little nose. Trim my thread. And it's just going to stitch that little nose. I've chosen a light tan or a cream color for his nose. You can pick whatever color you want. His little nose. Alright. And now it wants me to put the black back in to do the band on his hat. Alright, so I've stitched down the brim of the hat, I did his nose, and I've stitched out the band around the hat and gold, and now it's stitching the green on the buckle, I guess you could call it, of the brim, of the band around his hat. And it's going to do a 4-leaf clover on his beard right here, and it will be done. And I'll be back when he's finished. Well, I was wrong. I forgot about these little black bands. They should have stitched right after the band around his hat, so I'll have to change that in the file before I post it. I have a Facebook group that I will post this and provide a link at the bottom. Cut that thread. There we go. Whoops. Ah, darn it. Cut the wrong thread. Hello. That's what I get for waiting so long to cut the thread. Now I gotta go back about 10 stitches and 10 or 20 stitches and get that done. Just wait. Trim that off. All right, he will be done after this. Of course, you're free to stitch any color that you choose on this design. It will be a free design. Do not share it, please. Refer whoever wants it to my Facebook group. They can join the group and download it for themselves. Do not claim to be your own. Alrighty. And there we go. And there's my little St. Patrick's Day gnome. You do not have to stitch this background stitching. You can completely skip it and do the rest of him, and it'll be perfectly fine. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, thumbs up, and share. And if you haven't subscribed, subscribe, because I will be posting more videos that go with more designs on my group. Thank you so much for watching. And have a very happy St. Patrick's Day. Don't forget to wear your green. Bye-bye.